I'd like to call a regular meeting of the Eugene Water Collection Board to order for March 1st, 2022. The first agenda item is the agenda check. Does anybody have any additions or requested changes to the agenda? If not, then input items from the board members and general manager. I'll start with Commissioner Carlson.
Right. So this last month I attended the LCOG, the general LCOG meeting, and we got an update on the Senior and Disability Services Program. I wanted to let you know that I'm serving on the Budget Committee, the Audit Committee, and on the Executive Committee. There were a couple of things that were brought up. One was that I let them know that we're working on an equity and diversity inclusion policy. They mentioned that EWEB is a part of a group, ECC, that is looking at how we can do that kind of broadly. So if there's any way that we can have our work have a broader impact or get information from that group and others that are also doing this work, I thought that was an interesting connection. And then I also thought it was interesting that EPUD is looking at we do kind of a roundabout and all of the different agencies report. And EPUD is looking at doing a generator program for their customers. Somewhat like we do with the loan program. So some of their staff may reach out. I let them know that we kind of been doing that. They were trying to figure it out, and so we've been doing that for a while. So it was a nice thing to share. And that's my thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Commissioner McCray.
Nothing for me, thanks.
Mr. Schlossman.
Nothing from me.
Manager Lawson.
Nope, I'm all good, thank you.
I got two items. Number one, Sonia and I have been meeting weekly with Ann, spearheading herding cats, so to speak. She's been doing a wonderful job, and it's been a very fast-paced thing, but you know, time kills deals, and I'm glad that she is doing what she's doing. And between her and the rest of the staff, they've been doing a very good job. I'd like to say thank you very much for that. Frank and I had a meeting with the Springfield mayor and city manager yesterday, a very productive meeting. We talked about second source water and land use challenges and then movements such as that. I think we had a really good outcome of that, plus a new topic that came up that was a little alarming, and that's that the 42nd Street levee in Springfield is eroding rapidly. I think they lost 9 feet since last time we measured it. That's basically the buffer that keeps the river from meandering in North Springfield. That's right above our intake. And that's right where, I mean, there's a lot of challenges going there. He's talking about maybe a 10-year project. Maybe Frank, if you want to elaborate on that a little bit, but that's first I'd heard about it. But what it means is the river, once again, is going where it wants to go. If we don't deal with it, it's going to be a pretty big problem.
Yeah, thanks, President Brown. The conversation around 42nd Street levee was one where they're initiating some project planning shortly. They are looking at the availability for federal funds and other kinds of financing. As commissioners know, and as much of EWEB staff knows, urban runoff is still one of our highest risk areas for our watershed. I agreed to get the appropriate people connected with the city manager as part of that process. So I would expect probably Susan Prickey, who's our supervisor of water quality, to be part of that team, and potentially some others. But I haven't connected with staff on that, but agreed that we would work with the city of Springfield on the whole, potentially a whole series, a whole decade's worth of projects right above our. Thank you.
Thank you. If nothing else, I'll go to the next agenda. John B., I'm sorry. Didn't see you.
Thank you. Not much to report. I did attend the McKenzie Watershed Council's monthly meeting. They did a report on some of the restoration projects that we were a part of, and got some reports from ODF&W on some good numbers on returns of reds and other promising things that are going up in the watershed. Great group of people, very committed. The trust, the Watershed Council, down to the guides and the McKenzie fly fishermen, a whole bunch of people upriver that really care about the watershed and the water quality. So it's great being a part of that commission. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for running over you there, John. I'm trying not to do that. So Okay, the next agenda item is public input. Before I do that, I'll read the preamble. When your name is called, please clearly state your name, and optionally your address or ward. Each speaker will offer 3 minutes to present their testimony. If you keep track of the time, you'll hear an audio notification when 3 minutes is elapsed. If this is by telephone, remember to unmute your call, press *6. If you're calling from a landline, or simply use the unmute button and call from your cell phone. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose. Although by policy, we do not engage in a back and forth dialogue. Please note that the failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. The question is presented by a speaker and the board does not provide an answer. Any web staff member will contact the speaker, so the question will be addressed at a later time. Okay, we have one person signed up in person. Is there anybody involved? Okay, Tom Shepard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Principal's office every time. Hey people, it's me, Ego Chick, otherwise known as Tana Shepard, 4J teacher, teacher on special assignment. It's a long title. And as the EWEB Education Partnership Grant Coordinator and educator, this is my 5th year role. And I'm Ward 7, 200 North Monroe is the address I'm going with today for work. So I just want to thank EWEB and the board, as usual, for the continued support for our meaningful education partnership. With teachers and students back in person this year, time is actually flying, but we're still in mandatory visitor mode. So the students are not really having very many enrichment activities, but because I'm a 4J teacher, I can go in. So I have been getting in a bit. And just a small report, the virtual salmon education, even though it was virtual, it was still super successful. Probably do a hybrid form next year because some people liked it more than going in person. So can serve more people. And they're actually requesting a similar climate related unit. I started doing some things called Wonder Walks, give me an A in STEAM, some art projects, in particular Water's Life murals. And then realizing that most people don't understand we have 3 water systems. And so trying to bring that in a gallery walk format with the watershed model also. And then middle school, the wind energy unit is out I was out at Monroe Middle School today and it was so fun. And so that's out and kids are testing blade designs to capture the most wind and learning about that alternative energy source. And we're revving up for the EWEB EV Challenge this year, formerly known as the Solar Challenge. It'll be site-based this year. We have 25 teachers across the 3 districts signed up. And they're super excited to offer this and I think it will actually be a nicer equity lens. And so we're just going to kind of work with this new model. And then also something that we added last year in the spring is solar cooking with the 6th graders. And so that's something that we'll use some of the panels left from the solar challenge to do some little PV arrays to play around with. And then with the high schoolers, it's primarily the 4J climate justice team. And so I meet with them every Wednesday. It's students from all 4 high schools. We're trying to get ECHO involved as well. And so they have some pretty big projects this month. They have organized a clothing exchange with each other across the districts. They're the schools are going to meet with each other. We're doing some tree planting on a Saturday. And then they're also going to be part of the Climate Revolution bike ride on the fall. And then, let's see, what else? Continuing the Eco Experience, Eco Check newsletter and the website stuff that's pretty popular with the teachers, helps them stay in tune with what we're doing. I've been invited to be part of a summer school planning team to develop an enriching environmental-based summer program. And so that's something that's just starting and that's kind of exciting and dreamy actually of what school can maybe be like all the time. And then continuing collaboration with my colleagues across the district in science and math to stem it up. And then more recently connected with OMSI and U of O around Shape Alert and hopefully finally getting some emergency preparedness lessons out next year. But 8th grade is moving forward. And so I'm kind of aiming for maybe 5th grade for this. So overall, we're continuing to adapt to this current education model, and we are really surveying and exploring lots of ideas to continue on with what we've learned over this time. And again, it's just a great honor to be a teacher and a EWEB person. And yeah, I just love the city and I love being with youth and I love my role. And so I really appreciate continued support. And I didn't see the timer, so I probably went over it.
You're doing just fine.
Okay.
All
Great, thank you very much.
Don't leave, we may have some comments.
Okay, I won't leave it. Thank you. Thank you.
So that's it, then I'll close the public input and ask for comments from commissioners. Schachter.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank you for all of your work, and it's really great to see your enthusiasm right now, because I know that a lot of teachers and educators are not feeling enthusiastic about their jobs and what's going on. So I'm super proud that UWEB supports this kind of work and is bringing part of the fun, but energy into the classroom. So thank you for all of that.
And let me make you plug in.
Yeah.
Sonia.
Well, thank you. I always appreciate hearing what you're up to, and I love hearing how it's modified and changed throughout the years to match, our goals and strategic roadmap. So thank you for, tailoring it to that and always coming back and reporting to us. I don't know if you just do that on your own or if somebody prompts you, but anyway, I really appreciate it. And if I was just curious if at some point, obviously not tonight, but at some point, I can find out which schools actually are kind of opting in to participate. I'm guessing that it's an opt-in sort of program, and it's not like it, but I'd be really just curious to see which schools are participating.
Ben?
Yeah, I just appreciate the in-person update. It's
B.
Yeah, I just want to echo everything that everybody else has said, and I'm looking forward to maybe when you have somebody, a nuclear engineering class that's going to split an atom and put a reactor out for us. With wind and solar, teach our kids. Just joking. Thank you very much.
John, I'd like to make a couple comments if I may. Number one, I've sat here for a long time, and prior to you, the only time anybody would come to that podium is when we were considering cutting something. But to come here and be proactive and say, this is what I'm doing, thank you, and everything, is really a breath of fresh air. Trust me, that goes miles with myself on that. And so I think that's a very smart thing for you to do. And it's smart for you, it's smart for the program. So thank you very much. Number two, I know that in the past, I know that this is funded by ratepayers. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of students in this community that aren't part of the public school system. And are they, and I've talked about this before, are they benefiting? Is there any way that they can benefit from this program? Like I'm thinking about Marist and O'Hara, things like that, plus some of the private schools.
So, if I recall, we did take a look at that. I believe it was a couple of years ago. At roughly what the equivalent funding would be. It wasn't a substantial amount from a financial perspective. I think the original funding for the schools came out of a similar history that like a SILT, where we were actually paying the schools. We decided to turn that into more of a grant program. We didn't have that same arrangement historically with private schools, so we don't do anything presently with private schools. That would be something that the board would have to weigh in on, and we could provide the board with what the equivalent level of funding would be for that, if the board agrees that that is something that would be in your interest.
I'm just thinking of the theme of DEI and the equity inclusion, making sure that we treat as many people equally as we can. So that's just my perspective.
If the board, even through head nods, would like me to bring something back with what that level of investment would look like, I'd be happy.
I for one would. Others, you don't have to agree with me. It's just we got to get 3 head nods before we bring it back, and not okay with the way it is. That's fine too. I'm just trying to make sure that all our ratepayers have as much access to these types of programs as we have.
And it wouldn't even take 3 head nods, and I can dust off what we did before, just to provide additional.
I guess for me, one of the things I would be interested in is what other school districts outside of Fort J that we serve, not necessarily the private schools, but the public schools, like some of the schools up the Mackenzie that we serve, or is there Santa Clara area that is Bethel? Do we Do we electrify Bethel? That would be just one of my questions. Are there public schools that were serving as EWEB providers that are not covered by 4J? That would be helpful information for me.
So Commissioner Borowski, the Bethel School District and the McKenzie School District are included in our educational grant program. And Springfield, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Well, Tom, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And it's so good to see all of you. I'm thrilled that I got to be the first one in person, so.
100 years.
Yeah, literally. I don't think it's been like that. Well, thank you, and thanks for having a little dance back to work. I know I'm breaking the rules. I'm always good for that.
Okay, the next agenda item is the consent calendar day. Is there anybody like to make a motion to adopt or anything? I'd entertain a motion to adopt consent calendar day.
And move to adopt. Second.
Moved by Schlossberg, seconded by Carlson. All those in favor signify by saying aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Consent calendar. Anything needs to be pulled from there? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved by Carlson, seconded by Schlossberg to approve consent calendar B. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Raise your hand. Aye. Okay, the next agenda item number 7, EWEB City Eugene Joint Initiatives. So yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I noticed that a number of the items that are on our consent calendar have had increased in price significantly. I mean, 40 to look like even 100% in some cases. I just want to make sure that, you know, if we're looking out budgetarily that we're still understanding, because I know that we made some adjustments here and there, but that seems like a lot. That's a much bigger jump on some of these. So just wanted to flag that as a board for us to keep aware of, and if staff continue to see this.
And I'll just piggyback on that too, if I may, because I know that some of our budget assumptions are 3%. And I just attended the construction cost seminar. Average construction costs have gone up 41% last week. Some things like steel, 127%. I mean, it's off the charts. And so, hope we're hedging.
Commissioners, I will touch on that briefly in my 2020.
Thank you. Okay, EWEB City of Eugene Joint Initiatives agenda.
So commissioners, this has been provided in your backgrounder. This was the follow-up to a discussion that commissioners had last month. We tried to capture the essence of that in a roster of agenda items that was consistent with the conversation, so that the board could approve general direction to the president and vice president who will be meeting with City of Eugene leadership. That is one of the attachments in the board items, and we just turn it back to President Brown for any deliberation adjustments and hopefully approval.
Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments about this? We did go over this last meeting, and this is an action item, so if questions or comments, I would entertain a motion to adopt the City of Eugene liaison agenda and set forth in the background. Matt.
Yeah, just a quick comment about the ability to address or the desire to address qualification. I know it's something that's part of the conversation. I'm anticipating that our board may have some clearer direction or discuss goals around electrification in the coming months. And I just want to be sure that that's something that we're able to update and incorporate into the conversation with the city. It feels like there's such a nexus there, and they're not to put too fine a point on it, but looking at the report that you provided us on the strategic goals, the number of buildings that were electrified in June, at least through our programs last year, was 86. And there's some 20,000 residences or buildings rather in energy, natural gas. And if we're going to get anywhere towards getting off the fossil fuels, that pace just doesn't get us there. And so I'm hopeful that this board will make some statements about our goals there, and I just want to make sure that there's space for that to be part of the conversation as soon as the board elevates that issue.
It's the board's discretion. I mean, and the process, the protocol is that we go through and we fill this out, and we go meet with the city, and this is our agenda. It's just more formalizing and memorializing where we're coming from, and it's a board generated agenda, not a staff generated agenda, and we'll go forward with that. And if that's not correct perception of where we're going with this, correct.
I believe that's correct. I mean, that originally this came out of the liaison discussion in January, where commissioners, in general, wanted to provide some guidance to the liaisons, president and vice president, during discussions with civic leadership. And last month, it was discussed that it doesn't have to be overly formal, but some kind of guide rails and would be appropriate. Some of these topics fully expect will evolve over time. So I would expect the liaisons to come back to staff and the board with potential issues that feedback the other direction as well. So hopefully don't see this as a one and done kind of document or interaction, but something that will evolve.
Yeah, and so that it might warrant us providing some time on the agenda, just carving out time every few months just to check in on where that conversation is and if we can go in this direction, if information is going that ways. I know we check in as board members at the beginning about what's going on, but it feels like this particular relationship is especially important in terms of community and EWEB goals. So might be worth pushing that in as a formal agenda item on a regular
Sure, if you want to put it on the agenda, we can put it on the agenda. That's easy. It just takes 3 head nods and it's done. So, Sonia, and then
I'm just curious if we have any debates we can set up.
I think the target was to meet after the month where we do our quarterly reporting, so we have sort of the most present data. I guess I would look to Holly to check and see where we are with the first meeting.
It's pending.
Okay, it's pending. We have set dates.
Following on that, then, to Matt's point, then we would maybe have to have it on the agenda then, the meeting.
so the next meeting. Yeah. Did
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the inquiry we have is how will council solicit input from EWEB and other impacted stakeholders regarding electrification? And I think that's super key because in the past 3 years or whatever that we've had this relationship with the city, I just want to keep going around and around and around and around, and we have to keep kind of offering our expertise or saying like we have information, but we've never gotten any kind of request for that information specifically. So I think that we need to meet with them to ask them directly this question. Because to address what you said, Matt, we can talk about it all we want, but we can't force them to either do anything, take our recommendations. And so far to me, it seems like I believe everybody's interested, but there just doesn't seem to be very clear channels.
I think that's really good because I think now that we've got a directive, follow up with that. And, oh, by the way, when we give them a goal, we got a way to achieve the goal. We're not just saying, here's a goal, here's a goal, here's a way to achieve it through the silver. So I think we're giving them a lot more than we've given them in the past. And now it's going to be it's pushing it a little bit more and push.
Yeah.
Yes.
Commissioners, I would also point out that there are now 2 the resolutions that have been passed through City Council regarding electrification, specifically its impact or how the count. There's two related to natural gas. One is in new construction. One is so there is actually a mechanism cities in hopefully provide guidance EWEB as to how to weigh into these stakeholders.
Further discussion about this? If not,
I guess one last thing, and it's not necessarily pertinent right now, but in the future, that when there are new counselors elected, that I don't know if we ever do any short little orientation or meeting with them, just to talk about what is EWEB's role and how does it intertwine with the city. I know that's not necessarily our responsibility, but if you're a new person on the city council, you might not fully understand that. And so I'm just wondering when there are new people, or if there might be people who are on there now, so they understand it. And I know we've done presentations, but just in the future, if there are new city councilors, perhaps just doing some short meetings.
okay. Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll adopt the
Commissioner Brown. Yeah, I'm fine with the agenda as it's stated. I think that I haven't sat in on any of these meetings, particularly with the city councilors. I've sat in on several meetings with city councilors, and I think the idea of keeping the agenda short and to the point and having clearly defined goals and not getting too many of them out in front trying to convey what our feelings are and what they want from us is a great thing. So I'm in favor of moving the agenda forward, and I would make a motion to that extent.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Carlson, moved by Rfp. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next agenda item, we will right along. Number 8, state of the utility address and prior year end operational strategic goals. Thank you.
Thank you, President Brown. If anybody should be interested, the basis for this presentation and discussion comes from our published year-end report, which, because of the many EWEB contributors to it, is probably the best public utility-based year-end report that I've read. It's incredibly interesting and informative as to what's going on in the utility. If anybody wishes, it is linked to the agenda on EWEB's website, so I would advise people to go read that report if they'd like to. Good evening, commissioners, EWEB teammates, customer owners, and interested members of the community. Last year, I used the term healthy to describe EWEB as we were learning to perform in the midst of a pandemic, which was having tangible impacts on our community and our organization. For 2021, I would describe EWEB as persevering, resolute, persistent, and accomplished. There's only one reason I have the fortunate opportunity to use these words to describe EWEB, and it's our people, including frontline contributors, supervisors, managers, executives, board members, community partners, union, non-union, operations, administrative, management, and support. It takes an entire team to be successful. I'll use most of the presentation portion of this agenda to describe the results, issues, opportunities, and trends. So I'll focus most of my state of the utility comments on high-level thoughts and culture. I'd like to start by thanking all of the commissioners. For all of us in the organization, it is a pleasure to work with a board that is respectful, hardworking, and caring about the services we provide and the legacy that we leave. There were times that challenged you this past year, but we appreciate your support, leadership, guidance, and advice as we tackle some important issues in the years ahead. 2021 saw some incredible results from EWEB as we delivered over $2.3 billion kilowatt hours of electricity and 9.5 billion gallons of high quality drinking water to roughly 200,000 people in our community. We did this in a manner consistent with our values of safety, reliability, affordability, environmental stewardship, and community. We did this under conditions that stressed our supply chains, put new inflationary pressures on our costs, and in a treacherous workforce climate that saw the great resignation, in some cases the great migration, and a new labor market tightness, putting additional strain on EWEB's already loyal and professional workforce. In 2021, EWEB incredibly achieved 8 of our 9 annual organizational goals and sub-goals, with the supply chain issues associated with advanced metering being the only notable exception. Financially, we are sound, and because we use a comprehensive source to tap or source to switch approach to delivery, reliability is solid and water quality is good. In 2021, we worked with the board to update the strategic plan, further identifying key 3 to 5 year milestones and revising our values. We collaborated and aligned with the board to develop direction and decision criteria on watershed recovery and protection, Lower Mackenzie hydro projects and their future, information systems and technology investment planning, wildfire mitigation planning, and multi-year cost of service analysis. We published an electrification impact analysis report that will inform certain aspects of our integrated resource planning going forward. We also experienced some challenges in 2021 and are working to address these issues transparently and intentionally. Most of these challenges manifested from specific issues and were contained within discrete trends, milestones, or issues. We recognize our opportunity and our obligation to take corrective action and work towards sustainable improvement. For that reason, many remedial activities are already included in our 2022 organizational or department goals. As I review the specific results later in this presentation, I'll elaborate on some of these challenges further. To close my comments the way I began, by thanking my EWEB teammates, the board, and our many partners throughout the community and region, I'd personally like to thank the executives and managers with whom I work most closely with and frequently, and also Ann Kaw and Holly Schubert, with whom I probably would go insane without them. Thank you, Ann and Holly, but really thanks to all of the EWEB employees for their efforts this past year. When I asked the EWEB managers yesterday if they had anyone that they thought I should mention in the State of the Union address, the response was so overwhelming, with so many names and departments, that I know President Brown would cut me off for overrunning my allotted time. So instead, I'll try to incorporate and recognize some of the departments and people as I go through the 2021 results next. Thank you, commissioners. And with that, I'd like to run through a few specific results, issues, opportunities, and trends. Thank you. Next slide, please. Holly. Thank you. Oh, next one. I just did that. So a few notable things from 2021. First of all, we continue to operate in some ongoing and new emerging issues with COVID, as everybody knows. The results, and including the safety, really a spectacular performance given the environment that we are operating in. I would like to, that's Lance Hughes walking with a mask. I would like to thank Lance Hughes and Christian for their work, kind of their being the centerpieces, the focal points for our ongoing COVID response and adjustments, and more response and more adjustments throughout the year. The metrics on safety were solid. Our good catch reporting in particular, which is a proactive method, was 40% higher than the previous year. Reliability and delivery was pretty critical, continued to operate well. The Oregon Health Authority did award EWEB with an outstanding performer recognition. This is phenomenal accomplishment for the water department. It's like an audit that you go through every 3 years, now 5 years, because we were considered an outstanding performer, and really leverages years of work from the water department. So I'd like to thank them for that. And included in safety was the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health Total Worker Health Affiliate status, and there's only about 50 of those nationally. So our safety record, and that's really also about health and welfare, not just safety itself. So that's a pretty distinguished honor for our safety program. All of our metrics financially were solid, all within board policy except the electric rate of return. We did have rate increases in 2021, the first in 5 years. We still remain in the middle of the pack on the electric side, and one of the best, most affordable on the water side. So even with those rate increases. From a community perspective, it's incredible the amount of touch points we have with the community, at least 167,000 direct customer contacts throughout the year. I would like to congratulate and thank Angelique Reel and the customer service department for really wrestling through a whole bunch of issues, some of them self-caused, some of them not, that our customer service department worked on this last year, including some health issues within that department as well. And so appreciate that. In energy efficiency, met our objective of more than 10,000 megawatt hours. Also a peak impact. We delivered over $2.5 million in incentives to do that, and another $1.8 million in loans for energy efficiency work. Customer care delivered $1.3 million, helping more than 4,600 customers directly. I would like to thank again Greg Kelleher and the solutions team for the work that they've done, and the communications team, and I'll get to some of that. Next slide, please. There was also some things that don't necessarily always make the list of objectives. A number of those include the MGP site, which really was not a published goal, but something we accomplished last year, as well as a transfer of some sale of some assets to Springfield Utility Board in the Glenwood area. Our response times increased this year, despite some of the heroic efforts from our customer service group. I'll talk about some of those a little bit later. We had a number of different building and renovation requests, especially on the electric side, and our lead times in that area stretched out longer than we would like. So that's an area that we'll be working on, and making staffing decisions for it as well. We also, some of the issues, we did have 95 successful recruitments, despite a tight labor market. We still, as the board knows, have some challenged positions that we're going to look to get creative on and work toward filling. And 70 internal promotions. One of the really fantastic things about working for an organization the size of EWEB and the construction of EWEB is that there are internal opportunities for advancement. Attrition was a little bit higher than normal in the area of people leaving the organization voluntarily for non-retirement reasons. 9.2% was total attrition. Some of that is 3% of that is retirement. About 5.2% of that was for those who voluntarily left. We also have some efforts to put forward in the Carmen Smith project. 62 of the 75 projects are on schedule, 9 completed. We are out of compliance on the fish passage work. We have improved our relationship with our settlement parties, which are part of that. So we feel good. Many of those issues are because of dam safety issues. Next slide, please. One of the things that it is important is to recognize your contributions, commissioners. We did welcome 2 new commissioners. They're still welcome. Rfp and McCray, and welcome back to Commissioner Carlson. Throughout this year, a number of accomplishments for the board. Some of those having to do with increased investment in watershed and watershed recovery, not just this year, but going forward. We definitely appreciated your support on the East 40th Water Project. And that's one where Laura Farthing, Jen Connors, the communications team, Janine Parisi, Wally McCullough, really have done an outstanding job on that project. And we really appreciate your support on that one. SD 15 was updated on climate change policy. And you have helped provide guidance on our wildfire mitigation plan, as well as significant guidance. You actually approved our operating version of that plan, so thank you. Another version based on evolving compliance requirements will be upcoming later this spring, and provided guidance on a number of different topics here. So we appreciate that support very much. Next slide, please. A lot of green on this one. This is pretty incredible results, given that we had 9 goals and feel like 8 of the 9 are either fully achieved or on target. And the difference there being on target, all of the initiatives for the year, all the milestones for that year were accomplished. We know there's further work there as the work continues, but a number of different accomplishments here. Pretty incredible given the environment that we were in. Next slide. I'd also like to talk a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing here. We are seeing inflation, cost impacts, and pressures. Commissioner Carlson, you mentioned that earlier. There are some items which have incredibly long lead times or are expensive. Not everywhere, and we aren't sure about the length of time that we'll continue to see inflationary pressures. As you know, in our long-term planning, we've averaged that out to 3% or so. Some of the near-term effects, some are isolated, some are not. We are seeing significant pressures well above that and are adjusting our work and our flow accordingly. I would like to recognize our purchasing group, Quentin Burrow and Rami Alkire and Sarah Gorsinger, for some of their incredible work to deal with supply chain issues that have just required a lot of patience and navigation and intuitive thinking this past year. You kind of see on this sort of heat chart some of the, and this is not an absolute chart, this is a trend chart. So for example, you can see water quality at the very high, kind of in the stable range in the middle. Water is above the colors and buckets below. Doesn't mean water quality is poor, it means water quality is stable. Watershed conditions slightly improving. So some things are slightly improving, some things are slightly decreasing. And we are seeing, I said, specialized recruiting. Our customer responsiveness is one that 2021 wasn't where we wanted to be. We are seeing improvements already this year in 2022. Workforce morale, workforce resiliency, those are, I think our workforce is becoming a bit more resilient given all the changes. At the same time, it's exhausting and it's tiring, especially when you have issues that are hard to recruit for, where you're putting a lot of pressure on those who do remain in the organization. We're going to have to pay close attention to that going forward. I will say that there's some real bright spots in the organization as well. The communications team, Jen Connors and her team, really did a lot of outstanding work this year in outreach. Some of them specific to projects, some of them related to issues that are upcoming, IRPs, electrification, and some of the work around Carmen Smith and Lieberg, and you go down the list, and we can tell that they're being pulled into more and more projects proactively, which is always a good sign. Dam safety and the dam safety program, those are slightly different things. Dam safety, as you know, there's emerging issues. We found more sinkholes this time in Trail Bridge. That always causes issues with FERC and others, but really Daniel Huang and who was our chief safety engineer, really done a phenomenal job. And Lisa and Mark Zenecker and others working on Carmen have really done an outstanding job there. So appreciate that. And the Carmen license, like I talked a little bit more about that earlier. But I think we go into this eyes wide open. We recognize that there's challenges here that we want to address. And some things that we know are improving and some things we know that are not. Next slide, please. Again, I just go through this and looking, there's always a human behind the data, behind the metrics, a lot of different people involved. Chris Taylor and generation and the work that they do at the generation sites from an operational perspective. We've improved our relationship with our largest electric customer, IP. A number of that is because of the work we did in our electric operations group, and also Eli Bala, who's our manager, customer relationship manager. So you look through, I think, the 116 pages of this report, and whether it's good or whether it's proven, really appreciate how transparent it is. The fact that there are people who are working on these things very directly, and owning the success. So definitely want to thank them, and would be happy to entertain any comments or questions commissioners have. And if I can't handle them, I'll pass them off to Rod Price or someone else who's in the room who can answer them better than I can. But so many opportunities to say thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a great presentation, and I think the way this report reads is a testament to not only the staff, but to our general manager and his leadership team. So thank you very much. Other questions and comments from the other board members? Sonia?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it really was riveting even at 4 a.m. So thank you to everyone. I know a lot of work goes into making this report and just running the utility. So it's wonderful that we see the numbers and track what we're doing. I really appreciate the change in having more KPIs and actually being able to track and see how we're doing as an organization. Not because we know that everything is going to go well or it's not. I mean, it's really a full look at these are the things that are going well, these are the things that are not going well, here's the reasons why in bold, and let's learn from bold experiences. So I really appreciate the celebration that comes out of this, and appreciate. One thing I did want to note was, given that there are supply chain shortages, high price increases, and staffing constraints, I just wonder if and we have so much that we have loaded into this year, I just wonder if it does warrant saying, are there things that we back off on a little bit because of that? So I just want to be cognizant of that, and we keep asking, I don't want to breaking. Like there are real situations that are out of our control here that let us know. I just want to put it. Thanks.
Any questions or comments? Matt?
Yeah, I guess I would just echo Cindy's comments. The transparency and the full picture of the there's enough reason I have full confidence in the team. The question is just really things that we the board need to be paying attention to, supporting changes that we can take now so that we're in a better spot hedge our risk a little bit. Anyway, yeah, and you did plenty of thanking of the staff, but certainly
John B.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the presentation and all the hard work that went into presenting the the staff report. I'll be honest with you guys. I went through that and I appreciated the little gas gauge meter on there. And I will be honest with you, when I saw a gas gauge that was in the acceptable or up above, I paid a lot less attention than ones that might have been on the lower end. You know, if you were on a quarter tank of gas, I might have read that section a little bit deeper. And I was encouraged that most of them were half a tank or fuller, which is very encouraging. And the ones that were at a quarter tank, like I say, they were that way for a reason. It wasn't because we weren't doing a good job. I think it was because there were things that were out of our control that put us into those positions. And I think we can learn from those. I'm looking forward to a day where I can skim through those with full tanks of gas and read the 180-page report in 20 minutes and just move on. But I think we're getting there. I think that the organization is doing a fabulous job. It's a big boat. Sometimes it's hard to turn a big boat, but I don't see that we need to make any big corrections to the direction that the organization is going. I feel comfortable with it, and I want to keep moving forward like some of my other commissioners have mentioned. We do have a lot of big things on the agenda coming up on the horizon, but with the staff that we have in place, I think we'll be able to manage to steer the boat the right direction, and we won't have to come in for fuel because our tank's going to be on 3/4 full. Thank you.
Thank you. Mindy.
Well, a big thank you, Frank, also to staff. I think that it's pretty amazing that I'll put myself in that, but really you all have done as much as you have in the second year of the pandemic. It hasn't affected your enthusiasm and seeing the big picture and how ready to just march forward and still tackle a lot of these big topics and big issues, and I really appreciate that. I also appreciate that you highlighted the places where we're missing the mark, because I think that's really important too. A lot of great stuff that's going on, but it is important to look at things where we underperform or things can go as planned. So I appreciate that you really look at that and think how to correct course on that. And I know one of the things you highlighted was workplace morale. I know that in most places people are feeling that, but I hope that employees can look at this and feel really proud of all the work that everybody's doing. Because, as a whole, everyone's doing a really good job. Thank you.
I've got a couple comments, if I may. Number one, I did catch a little slip there where you talked about the State of the Union rather than State of the Utility.
Oh, did I promote myself?
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, there is a State of the Union.
I recognize.
Which channels? Seriously, I just have a quick question. Surprise for me. This passage. What can you give me 50 words or less?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons. Some of it is our own planning and where we were at in that process, and the other part of it is being able to operate within FERC requirements when you have emerging issues like sinkholes.
Okay, so we don't get.
It's a combination of both. I don't want to totally blame FERC, but I also they're a contributing factor to that. And we are going to have to work with our settlement parties, the other settlement parties to the license, and on new timing, adjusted timing. It looks like it's a number of years out, simply because there's a lot going on at Carmen. A lot of the other projects are fine, but there's a couple of them that are going to be delayed. So we're working on that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, right?
I will address the fact that I know there's a lot on the plate this year. I think that we feel that, as we all feel that as leaders of an organization, I think we're paying attention to it. I don't think we have issues and have never felt like we could not approach the board and readjust from time to time if for some reason there are issues that prevent us or require adjustment. And one thing that I know we all appreciate about the board. On the other hand, there is a lot of work to be done. And we want to recognize that the things that are on our organizational goals, some of those are operational, and some of those are truly the position of utility long-term from a strategic perspective. And there is a nice mix of that. And there's a mix that sort of cuts across the utility. It's not all on one department, for example. But, please understand if there are conditions where we sort of feel like we're driving the organization into the ground, we are obligated to come back to the board and talk about that as a separate issue. And I have full confidence in the managers and executives that they will be looking at that as well. And employee morale is incredibly important. It's why it's part of our 2022 goals, if you recall, looking at that from a number of different perspectives. Because it has been a slog the last couple of years for a number of reasons. And I think the board fully understands that. But when you take a step back, and I know some of us get the opportunity to do that more than others, when you really take a step back and see all of what this organization does, it is incredible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, decision time. We're an hour ahead. We can move on, skip the break. Yeah, the next agenda item is the headquarters Rfp process. Or we can take our break and come back and do that, and or whatever's the will of the group.
I wouldn't mind a quick break. About to run out of power, and
Yeah.
I don't want to shuffle.
That's cool. We're just here for 5 minutes. We'll come back and reconvene. Thank you. Not a problem.
I'm okay for now.
Ann, can you hear me? Can-
Sometimes you have to correct.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, if you could ask Matt when he's talking, if he could speak up a little bit, or I don't know if it's his mask, but he comes through really garbled. I'm having a hard time understanding him. Everybody else is kind of coming through pretty good, so if he could just talk a little bit clearer, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John.
Okay, I'm going to reconvene the regular meeting of Gene Water Electric Board. The next agenda item is number 10, and goal number 8, headquarters property RFP process and document review. Frank and Ann.
Thank you, President Brown. I'll turn it over to Ann.
Thank you, General Manager Lawson. Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight, we're seeking your feedback on the draft solicitation process and associated documents for the sale of EWEB's headquarters property. Over the past couple of months, President Brown and Vice President Carlson have been working with the project team to incorporate the feedback that we received from you last into the process, and we're returning to you tonight with those results. As a reminder, we're hoping to take the feedback we received tonight and come back once again to the board with the next iteration of the RFP process that will earn your approval, hopefully at next month's board meeting. But most importantly, we want to get this right to ensure that EWEB creates a process that's fair and equitable. On the screen, you'll see our timeline, which lays out the upcoming board meetings and events. Does anyone have questions about what's coming up? Shall we move right along? Great. As we review the RFP process and related documents, we'd like to call your attention to a few things that have changed since we were last before you. We've taken your input and recommendations from the team, and we've made several updates you'll see here on the screen. You'll recall that we originally proposed an open-ended closing date, but because this had the potential to unnecessarily prolong the process, we've pivoted to a firm closing date 90 days after issuance. And to mitigate the risk that proposers may be challenged to complete their offers within that 90 days, we'd like to offer them to express an intent to propose. And by doing so, this would give EWEB awareness of proposals that are expected And the purchasing coordinator, if deemed necessary, could extend the closing date by 30 days via addenda at her discretion, depending on what we're expecting and what's actually come in. We did include a protest process. Although we don't expect to have any protests, we did include instructions and a timeline for doing so if desired. Legal counsel has drafted a non-disclosure agreement, and this would allow proposers to mark sensitive information as confidential that they'd like to have withheld from the public. And then after the competitive process is finished and we've issued an intent to award, we recommend making the proposals public, sans that confidential information. As far as acquisition options go, we've removed the long-term lease without an intent to purchase, as well as trades, with the notion that a long-term lease could be explored in the event we're unsuccessful at selling the property. And trades were removed due to the time and money to do our due diligence, and also the unlikelihood that EWEB would have a viable use for any properties in trade. The evaluation criteria was expanded as we discussed in executive session. And the RFP now reserves the right for the board to request best and final offers. The board is under no obligation to do so, but this would provide you flexibility to negotiate with more than one party in the event there's not a clear award selection. So do commissioners have any questions or comments about these recommended changes?
Questions, comments?
No questions, just, it all looks good. I feel like we're all taking the direction that we provided in. Thank you all for the effort that goes into this.
John B.
Yeah, thank you for this. A lot of hard work. Thank you to Sonia and Commissioner Brown for helping to steer and work on that committee. It sounds to me like you guys put in a bunch of time and effort on it. I really want to thank you for that, as well as the staff that also had to sit in those meetings with you guys. They deserve extra credit point for that. But no, on a serious note, I think that this gives the community and interested parties a fair and open process for us to look at how to dispose of this very important community asset. And I look forward to seeing some really great proposals. I think there'll be some really great ones out there. I've like I said in previous meetings, I've sat in on several RFP processes, and the hardest part is there's always more than one really good proposal. And the hard part for us is going to be, I think, weighing in between 2 or 3 or 4 really great options that will move the community forward and put this piece of property to its highest and best use. So I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you all for the hard work.
You. Any other questions or comments for Jenny?
Yep. I am probably very naive, but it seems super straightforward and clear. I know that once we start getting proposals in, we have to score them and whatever, it might not be so clear, but to me, from the point of view at this time, it looks very transparent and good.
Any other questions or comments? Any other direction for Ann or the committee? You know what we have to do? Ann, do you have what you need from us?
We do have a couple of other questions that we prepared in advance. And then I was just going to open it up to the board if there were any other areas they'd like to address that we didn't cover.
Sure.
So the next 2 slides have those questions. The first one's displayed on the screen. And his question is, should EWEB reserve the right to place a deed restriction on the property to limit certain uses? Do any commissioners wish to comment on that?
I will, because I'm the one that instigated it. Sorry, and it's created a little bit of a dialogue between me and legal counsel, but I'm not ready to back down. You know, at 4J, we've done that with the Y, we've done that with Eugene Civic Alliance. Peace Health does it because they want certain uses not to be put there, because if you just say, all right, you know, you can put a bookstore in, you can put an adult bookstore, you can put an adult establishment of that, because those are permitted uses. It doesn't define what type of bookstore, what type of establishment. And if we want to put those in, now is the time for it to say that there's certain uses that we don't want, we don't think will be not compatible with the overall goals and values of the community, goals and values of adjacent owners, or we can just leave it and just let nature take its course. But there's nothing to stop anybody from doing anything with the property. But we can put a deed restriction on it beyond what's called police power, which is the city's ability to regulate use and users through zoning, because the zoning is very wide. That was, I put it out there for discussion. I don't have to have it, I don't care, but I know that other. So Sonia, and then Nikki.
How far up does the deed restriction go? So
Forever.
good. Okay, so that's good.
Nikki?
Well, my question is to you, because you put this question out there. You must have some thoughts on this.
Well, I'm just doing what other public agencies have done, because 99 times out of 100 public agencies buy stuff, they don't sell it per se. But when they sell it, if they want to either preserve the legacy or integrity of the adjacency, I mean, the school district's primary intent was preserve, they don't want, if something happens at the Y, and they're no longer the Y, they don't want that to be a juvenile detention center or a private athletic club, both of which could happen. And so there's a provision in there, that they get to buy it back, and I mean, we structured it so we preserve the intent of that. We have those provisions in there, so if it's not a Y, we force it to buy it back, and if they try to sell something else, they can't do something. Same thing with Eugene Civic Alliance. They wanted to kind of make sure that whatever's there, if it's not Eugene Civic Alliance, it still fits with the mission and values of School District 4J and South Eugene Village Process. We don't have that issue here because we're not going to own anything, but it's whether or not we want to put that in. So, Frank, you have a comment?
Well, I guess, I don't know if you're willing to share your personal opinion. Do you think that we should place a deed restriction?
You know, if it's not too broad, I don't see anything against it. I know one of the comments so far is that the city is gonna, what's the comment that they said, Ann, the city's gonna go nuclear if we say no to adult bookstores? I said, really? I want to hear that conversation. But
I'll weigh in on that.
go ahead.
I don't know.
I don't think there's anything wrong with placing restrictions if the board wishes to do. What we can't provide to the board is what is presently in code. There are some restricted uses now, for example, a cemetery would be on that list, shooting ranges, things like that. There's a roster of things that are in present city code, not city code. Change this process for that. If the board, this is a legacy project for the board. We have been up at this site for 100 years. This building has been in existence since the 1980s. If the board felt like there were some certain restrictions that you wanted to run with the land forever because of the legacy you want to leave, that is perfectly acceptable to do, independent of what anybody else thinks from a legal perspective or a public entity perspective. You have the right to do that. Some deed restrictions could expire in a certain amount of time, but most of the time, if it was a restricted use, I could see this just, and this is your right to do.
The future boards can rescind it too.
Future boards could rescind it, censure the body. This is the body placing the restriction on it. The same body could remove that restriction. But I can have staff supply you with what the present code restricts, and if that's not enough for the board, then you can handle it.
Matt and Sonia?
Yes, I'd love to see what the current code restricts. I'm going to put a finer point in these. Not only is there, you think we put a legal restriction on, but are there certain uses that you think shouldn't be allowed on this property going forward? Or would you rather have that conversation later?
You know, that's, no, that's really hard to discern, because if we start saying certain uses, then the lenders if somebody's gonna try to go get a loan, the lenders get really nervous because they're always looking at that side, and they say, okay, we have to take it back. I want to sell it. You know, I don't care if it's a superstore or if it's a pot, you know, if they're rendering cannabis oil or whatever they do. They don't care. They just want their money. And we start throwing restrictions on use and users beyond what some might consider the norm, that could affect people's marketability. We could say, we could go there and in our negotiations with the final three, we could ask the proposer, do you have any objection to us, let's say, no adult bookstores, no massage parlors, no cannabis oil extraction, things such as that, and see what they say. I mean, this is a negotiable. I mean, we don't have to throw a deed restriction on it now. We can just say, we can have a conversation. But I think we got to have it here first. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm for a restriction to make sure this property is, you know, in line with the values. Not really do something that- I mean, it's right on the riverfront, it's still in downtown. I mean, it attracts a lot of people down there. We'd like to make sure that whatever we're not here, we're not. I mean, we take good care of this property, and the bike path is right here, and the river is right there. Whatever came here, I want to make sure we take care of the property for the public community. If there are some restrictions that we can place that are reasonable, that aren't discriminatory in other ways, I would like to ensure that, you know, proper use of this is maintained.
Right.
I believe the question for the board, as far as our guidance, has to do with, do you want to reserve that right as part of the process? And it sounds like, yes, we'd like to reserve that right to potentially look at this at some point.
John B.
Thank you. As far as deed restrictions, for me, the thing that I would be interested in is if we're putting out these criteria for community, you know, the scoring that we've established, I would like to see whoever buys it have some sort of a time frame before they could sell it again. That would be and I don't know if that would be part of this conversation or not. But as far as putting use constrictions on it, the city of Eugene has gone and done what are permitted uses in different areas and zones, and the community had an opportunity to weigh in on those and set, you know, in this particular zone, these things are permitted, and I don't believe that it's our job to decide what uses can be used on a piece of land, that just because we own it. You know, I think I'm thinking back to the scenario of a CC&R, right? We're basically putting a CC&R on this piece of property. CC&R is conditions, covenants, and restrictions, where people can say you can't subdivide your property. You can't, you have to paint it a certain color, those types of things. And CC&Rs and those types of things have been found to can be discriminatory. Now, I'm not saying that what we're putting on here would do that, but I just have hesitancy to go above and beyond what the community has decided is appropriate uses for any piece of land in the community. So I would be, you know, yeah, we can reserve it and see and ask questions, but I'm leaning against putting any kind of deed restrictions on the property.
Other questions or comments? Ann, yeah, what you need from us on that?
I do, and we have just one more question.
Okay.
This one's around a customer survey. In response to the board's previous interest in better understanding customer owners' opinions about the sale of the property, staff has looked into a range of options for surveys. Depending on the option selected, consultants say it could take between 6 and 12 weeks to execute the survey from start to finish. And we do understand the importance of moving the RFP process along. So if the board directs staff to proceed with the survey That could be done in tandem with the RFP solicitation. So at this time, we'd like to hear from commissioners whether or not you'd like us to conduct a survey. If yes, what level of engagement is appropriate to meet your objectives? And also, if you'd like to comment on what you'd like to gain from the survey and how you'd like to use that information, that will help us make sure our questions align with your intent and we get the information you need.
Andy?
I think that I'm not so interested in a customer survey. I'm not sure that the information that we would get from that would be necessarily meaningful. Not that I don't think that it's important to know what customers think, but I feel like I'm trying to think of what would make me weigh my decision, given that we're going to have like a scoring rubric that's pretty clear. It's pretty clear of how, like, we're deciding what that rubric is. I just wonder if by having a survey, we kind of open ourselves up to more disagreement or controversy. I mean, if the survey came out that, like, for whatever reason, people that we surveyed want to put up, think that we should use this to put up a high-story parking garage or something like that. Like, I just don't know that that wouldn't cause me then to evaluate the proposal differently than what I believe. Yeah. So, I don't mean to sound like I don't value engaging the public in things, but I think in this case, I just don't know that we're going to get anything that's going to be super helpful. I don't know if I'm being clear, but that's just my reaction to this.
John B?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Mindy. You know, if you do an open-ended survey, people are going to want things that we can't deliver, especially if we're weighting the value of that we're going to get to our customers. You know, people may say, I want to have an art center there that kindergartners can go and do finger painting or whatever and have a no cost thing. That may be great and good, but people don't understand that we have parameters that we're looking to meet, and one of the main parameters is giving value to our customers. And so I've seen surveys in the past where you ask people what they want and they'll tell you, but they don't realize what the economic impacts of those are. It's like, I want to have this and this and this and this, but they don't realize that this and this cost a lot of money. Well, in our case, it would be like, yes, I want this, and this for the EWEB property, but if we were to give them that, we wouldn't realize the value to our customers that we're trying to reach. And so if we have an extensive survey that says we want all of those types of things, and we can't give that because we've set up these criteria, then it seems disingenuous, right? That we're not listening to the community. So I want to hear from the community. I want to get the message out to the community of that we are doing this in a responsible manner, and we would love to hear from them, especially once the RFPs are submitted. I think that that's the point as to where we can get input, which one of these might be best for us. But it's tough just putting out there, what would you like to have at the EWEB property? Because you get a million different answers. Thanks.
Well, I suggested that we do a customer survey, so I appreciate that's why I kept quiet for a little bit. I wanted to hear this. I suggested it in part because I thought that we were going to have the opportunity to, as we looked at the different buckets in the RFP proposal, actually get feedback from the community on how to weight those. But I don't think the timeline is really aligning with that, and I think we kind of laid it up, reinvesting you know, as a group, there's some ideas there about, you know, which buckets to do what. So it feels to me like maybe that is not the way to go with it, but I do want to make sure that whatever, you know, when like here we are tonight, there's the opportunity for public feedback. I just don't know if people really even have a sense of what, you know, what we're doing, you know? I know that we put it out there and we publish it, but it seems like people don't come out of the woodworks and say anything until we've already made a decision. And that is where that's where I get a lot of feedback of like, we're just making all these decisions and closed doors. And it's like, well, clearly not. I mean, we're here all the time talking about it. People have the opportunity to come, but unless we're proactively asking for their feedback, then we just don't get that. But the kinds of things that I would like particular feedback on are really around, you know, how do we weight these proposals and the scoring on it? And I feel like the timeline that we've set up maybe isn't conducive to that, but maybe when we actually have the proposals there, doing more work around, here's the 3 that the board has, you know, have been brought back based on, you know, we've set up all the process, and then the 3 or whatever that come back to the board for review, maybe that's the time we could just at least send an email out to our customers saying, you know, these are the ones, hey, if you have some thoughts on it, weigh in, let us know how you feel about it. So at least our process weighs it down, and then once we have, you know, a group that we feel like are good for the community in some form or fashion because they've met our criteria, then maybe that's where we can get public feedback. And I would say not, I mean, obviously not a phone or an online open, maybe the informal online survey is probably the way.
Yeah, I have kind of mixed feelings. Part of me feels like this is such a significant decision that it would be valuable to have some input here, but as you just pointed out, I'm trying to figure out how the timing works, if this is useful to us, if it helps inform our decision. I actually think we might get more people saying, hey, we really want to see that so to benefit, you know, EWEB customers. We really want the greatest economic. I wouldn't be surprised if the results we got were similar to what we're seeing here. To your point, which is exactly spot on, that we won't get feedback until after we made a decision. Maybe, he says sarcastically, we should put out a press release that we just sold the building to a Seattle developer, and then we'll get input on what we should do with the building. He says sarcastically. Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'll go ahead, Frank.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I careful what you ask for. I mean, having been through the 17-acre, we had hundreds of people here. We had charrettes, we had everything. We spent $1 million something doing that, and then as soon as we sold it, they changed. And I think the proposers are going to tell us that they're going to do their homework. This is a big deal. They're going to do their homework that makes economic sense, and that where the greatest demand is. The greatest demand is going to come from the greatest group of people that want to use it, whether that's a public-private partnership or whatever it is. They're going to do their homework and say, hey, but if we start telling them what to do, that's going to certainly affect. I mean, if the community says we want nothing but a library, we want nothing but a museum, those don't answer. And where's that money going to come from? And so we're going to have to, then that's going to force us into a quandary. Do we disregard the people we solicited or not? I mean, I do notice in our future agenda, and I wonder why we only have 10 minutes for public hearing on headquarters disposition in April. 10 minutes scheduled for a public hearing for that, and hopefully that's not the only time the public's going to have to weigh in on this.
They'll have multiple opportunities to weigh in. I guess my comments, President Brown, given this is done.
And then
I'm going to say surveys can be really helpful when you're trying to answer specific questions in a specific context. I think what's going to happen here is we're going to get a set of proposers that will give us some inclination as to the potential uses that they're proposing. It's going to be a relatively limited evaluation process from the standpoint. It's not going to be, to your point, they're going to do their homework, President Brown. It sounds like the board is very interested in ensuring that there is public awareness in this process, and there's a communication plan that we develop, and more time for the public who wishes to weigh in at various stages throughout the process. Agreed, the tendency, as we learn as public entities, is that people tend to show up either when you're making the decision or right after you've made the decision. And so what I would actually propose here, since there was even some money attached with this, was we ensure that this is highly visible, highly promoted in all sorts of media, which our communications plan will do, to ensure that we're receiving public input, especially when we start to see the proposals where someone has A versus B, they can start to provide insight into the community interests. But it doesn't sound like at this point there would be the specific answers and the specific context to what a survey would be. Fine.
I wonder if maybe it could be part of the broader, I know a number of years ago we did, I think it was in 2017, a customer survey. I don't really remember. Something like that since then, it was 5 years ago. I feel like if we were going to do a survey, maybe it could be part of just a broader general, how are we doing the whole, what's the state that customers do with that?
Okay.
Maybe, and then maybe there could be a little, feedback on that from.
We do have a customer survey plan for sometimes.
Okay, so I mean, if it could be a little highlight in there about the proposals that we have. Dovetail on it. That's my 2 cents. Or do we know?
Well, or even, are you aware that you have been selling the building and then you link to the information that we have on the website?
Sure. A little infomercial in the middle of a survey. That makes sense.
The other questions or comments regarding this particular topic? And you have what you need?
Well, that's the end of the prepared questions we have for the board. Our goal is to take what we heard tonight and come back next month and present you with something that we hope is at a state that earns your approval. So if there's anything else that you saw in either the RFP, the non-disclosure agreement, the process, we really want to get your approval on all of that. So if there's any other guidance you'd like us to incorporate into those before we bring them back for potential approval, I'm all ears. Otherwise, I have what I need.
And I had a little contention about the ability to accept a promissory note versus cash. Are we going to get into the weeds on that here, or where are we going to go? When is that discussion going to come up? Because I know that council said they don't like promissory notes, and I said, well, then that could eliminate some proposers because of, tie up the product with this character, $4 million in cash, and sit on it for half a year. A lot of nonprofits can't do that, right?
I think based on the way you described it the other day in the project team meeting and how the promissory note was used, we can incorporate that.
I just want to make sure we don't exclude somebody because they can't write the check for.
Sure.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Well, here we go. Thank you, Ann, and thank you for doing such a great job of herding us and keeping us in line.
And thank you, President Brown and Vice President Carlson, for your participation so far. It's not done yet. And I did make a comment about employee morale the other day. I'm not saying that there's any link between the project team.
I know that you don't let us meet in person anymore. I have for that. Sharp optics.
Thank you, though.
Oh, good.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Brown and Vice President Carlson, for your participation with the team, and thank you, commissioners, for your feedback tonight. For next steps, as President Brown mentioned, we have a public hearing scheduled for next month. That's a step that's in our internal property procedures, so we'll take care of that. That'll raise a little more awareness. And we'll see you next month with something potentially for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Frank. Correspondence and board agendas.
So there were 5 items of correspondence. Everything from, I will make a comment about hold times. You got a memo on hold times and some of the things we're doing. One of the sort of sidebars to that, and I know that I just wanted to mention it to the board and to the public, we are looking into how we do and how we explain estimated reads. I know that that's come up on a number of occasions. We're looking into some things right now on that, and further information to come back to the board on that. I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of that. I mentioned it in this context because estimated reads, oftentimes, if you underestimate and you do the true up, it's higher than expected. If you overestimate, then that's higher than expected. Either way, there's some customer interaction, and that has contributed some this past year because we've had some higher than normal estimates for a variety of reasons, but that's why it relates to whole things. So I just want to mention it in that context, but more to come on that. The other one, information on the limited income household water assistance program, which is similar to LIHEAP for water purposes. Jason's legislative update, an update on the state of McKenzie watershed annual report, which had a number of interesting things about the state of the watershed, and then our role in the World Athletic Championships, Oregon 2022. I know that some board members were interested in how we're participating in that in some of the areas, so that was explained. And we do have staff available if anybody has any questions on items. If not, I can move on to the board agenda.
Please do.
I have a question.
John?
Yeah, I don't know if Jason's on the call or not, but is there any update? I know we're getting towards the end of the legislative session. Was there any update on Senator Manning's ask for the $20 million for the second treatment plant? And I saw he was. I don't know if he's attending, but is there any more information on that?
Is Jason on?
I haven't seen him in the call.
He actually mentioned something to me about one of the other projects, Commissioner Borofsky, actually earlier today in passing, and said he was going to provide further updates on that. So probably by the time we check in next week, I'll have much more of an update for you and the rest of the board. But I know that he did say that we had received funding for one of the projects. It was not the he did not mention specifically the Willamette treatment plant option, but a different project. So I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, and just for the record and our other board members, we met with Commissioner Brown and I and staff did a Zoom call with Senator Manning and put out a request for some funding for the second treatment plant. And he seemed like he was all in on it. So I'm hoping he carries that enthusiasm up the board. I know that the state has quite a few sufficient funds this year, so hopefully there'll be some sort of money that might help defray our cost of building the second treatment plant.
Yeah, we provided Senator Manning and some of the others on the budget committees several project levels and options. We also know that the University of Oregon apparently is going to be awarded several $1 million for wildfire cameras, which will also have some potential benefit to our situational awareness. So there's some things trickling out, Commissioner, and I'll get more details to you and the rest of the board.
Thank you.
On the board agenda report, one change that we made to this is the very first section highlights changes to the board agenda report from the last meeting, so that it's a pretty long report. So if you want to know, hey, what's different now versus last time, you can see where some things have been added. some things rescheduled. So it's a little easier. So sort of the decoder ring of the board agenda report. And as we go through this, it looks like President Brown is running some very efficient meetings. So where we have 0 time scheduled, there might be a little bit of flexibility to add things as we go. So don't hesitate to work on potential other topics, or if you see things that you might need more or less of, there's going to be some flexibility. Appreciate that. And other than that, I think we're pretty aware of what's on the board. I don't have anything else to discuss.
I have a question for Nate. Were we going to get a report on the hydrogen, the site in West Eugene and our collaborative efforts with Northwest and Bonneville to hydrogen facility in? You have an update on that?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of updates. I know that Northwest Natural and I have been trying to schedule a meeting with staff to take a look at where they are at with the hydrogen piece, and some of their rate recovery and some of the other things that go along with that. I suspect that meeting will get scheduled between now and our next board meeting, so I can, or staff can provide some updates to the board. I also know that the executive team is taking a tour of the new property and some of our existing facilities and the plans tomorrow, the Bertelsen property, just to take a look at what some of the interests of the utility in general are relative to that property and some of the other things. So I suspect between this month's meeting and next month's meeting, we'll have more than a day.
Okay. Anything else for break on agendas? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a proposal for a board conversation policy around our solar incentives. Rod and I met with a project team from Bethel that really highlighted for me some of the opportunities that exist. As you all know, public buildings, don't have to spend about 1.5% towards renewable projects or energy efficiency projects. And some of these projects are having a hard time finding a valuable, cost-effective way to spend those dollars, and a potential adjustment in the way that we price or that we incentivize power could change that to the benefit of the school, and therefore, because taxpayers paying for schools are largely the same geographic boundaries, right there, it seems like there's an opportunity there for mutual benefit. Anyway, without going into it too far, but happy to discuss more if there's any reservations. I can help them out. I would just propose a future agenda item on our solar incentives specifically as they relate to public projects. So I'm not asking us to boil up in a full conversation on all of our solar incentives, just those public projects where there's this kind of clear misincentive in solar units.
I'm okay with it. I mean, I've got a different perspective. I feel a lot where Jay and I understand why they get a waiver, why they don't put it on there, because it doesn't make any economic sense. They spend the money.
Yeah.
They spend the money on other things.
Yeah.
So I get that. And so I'm okay with that conversation. Any commissioner me wants to have something that's reasonable. I'm saying we'll put it on the agenda, we'll find time and we'll discuss it. We've got to have 3 head nods. We've got 3, 4, 5. John? B? Okay.
My question would be a little bit around timing. I know that at least what appears to be pretty full agenda items up until roughly the summer. We also tend to review rate kinds of issues as part of our fall process. So typically July through December. It could really be anywhere in there in the context. This, depending on how it's structured, it could create a rate classification that's different or something else. My question to the board would be having some initial discussion in sort of earlier midsummer. Does that work with the intent that if the board wants to go a different direction, we can incorporate that with our normal sort of rate making process? Does that work for the board in general? And if so, then we can work off of that aspect. So
Yeah.
Yeah, from my perspective, we're not going to change anything quick enough to affect this whole project. So this is really the projects in the future. And so, look, you all figure out when the best time is. I'd like to see us have our discussion and change made by the end of another year.
Okay, yeah, it would be sooner than in calendar year if we incorporate it in our rates and pricing discussions that we typically do in the fall.
Okay. Got it? Yep. Okay, board wrap up. We'll go around. John B. The only guy that's
Nothing from me.
Say again?
Nothing from me.
Thank you. Sonia?
Okay.
Matt?
Just, as I often do, appreciation for staff that make these meetings run just seamlessly. The interface that we have doing this hybrid is really, it's really seamless and well done. And thank you to Brown for getting us out of here early. How do you keep doing this?
Just overschedule. It's easy. Cindy?
Well, to comment on what you just said, Matt, we did get an email just not too long ago saying that some people are having a hard time understanding our audio who are watching this meeting. And I know that all the tech help has been doing a great job, and maybe it's us in our masks and not talking loudly enough. So I know that this is all a work in progress as we figure it out, and maybe next month we won't be wearing masks. I have no idea, but anyway, just there's still some glitches there, but also thank you to everyone who's helping us try to figure this out.
Thank you. I have a couple comments too. I want to just remind the other board members, we've got a couple things coming up. We're going to have to do the general manager evaluation, and we're going to get that. And when we get it, the sooner you can do that, the better, because then we have to meet in executive session to discuss about Frank's performance and things such as that. And so that's kind of a time-sensitive deal. And go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I was just going to say it part of the process is a little bit different this year. In the past, it's actually done scoring. You don't have to do scoring this year. Most of the evaluation has to do with, am I fulfilling my obligation under the contract, sort of a yes or no. And then most of the evaluation in executive session is for us to interact, for you to provide feedback, guidance, for me to do the same. So it's a little bit different. There's not the averaging of scores and the comparing of all that process. We tried to simplify it and make the discussion more meaningful, because it's a little bit different in the way that I handled the contract. So should be a lot easier this year. But as part of that, I will supply some comments around self-evaluation, the performance of the utility, which you just got a glimpse of, and some other things. But the intent is to have a good dialogue in it. That's what it is.
And the only other thing I'd like to bring up is that I personally got a lot. We as a board met a month ago, had dinner, and it was probably one of the best things we've done in the last 3 years. Get to know each other, do other things such as that. And then we, without objection, maybe talk about maybe doing that in another couple months or so, because it's hard to get us all on the same page and with vacations and such as that. But to have a board dinner and do that. So without objection, I see heads nodding. I think we'll probably see if we can do that. No, Frank, you're going to get the bill. You're buying. You're buying. So with that, anything else for the good of the order? John B? Good? Okay. All right. Well, with that, I will adjourn the meeting and say thank you to everybody, and have a safe month or so. Thank you.
Thank you.